Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Cherry Reynard. Today we're discussing targeted support and the implications for advisors. With me, I have Simon Farrant, now an independent consultant, but with a long track record in this part of financial advice. Most recently, he was head of enterprise development for Fidelity International. And we also have Chris Jones, who is financial services director at Dynamic Planner. So welcome to you both. Chris, let's start with the basics. How would you summarise targeted support in your own words?
Thanks, Chair. At this stage, it's a new regulated permission and activity, and what it will be is now down to the industry and the public. There's not really a thing as such yet. It's a permission. So what it means is a firm will be able to make mass recommendations to groups of people with a much lower bar for suitability than what we are used to in the advice industry, and it'll be a lot more specific and perhaps assertive than what we might imagine a financial promotions to be. So going back in in the olden days when you go and did group schemes, where you were selling group schemes out to firms, you turn up and spend a day signing up people for a group pension scheme. In reality, what you were just doing is seeing a group of people with a situation and giving them a solution en masse. And it actually used to be much easier to do that. I think what target support is kind of feels a bit like that. Well, of course, it's different because everything's changed since then.
Yeah. And Simon, your perspective.
I guess to build on Chris's point, first of all, at a slightly more technical level, targeted support works by identifying what are known as common support needs. And an example might be a D2C platform might notice that it has some number of drawdown clients who are taking very high withdrawals each year that are incompatible with the sustainability of the pension. So having identified a common support need, you then need to define one or more groups of consumers or consumer segments. And the mechanism, the regime works by providing people who are in a particular segment, in a situation, with what's known as a ready-made suggestion, which could be a product that they either do or don't hold. It could be, as in my example, merely the maximum sustainable rate of withdrawal for a pension is, we think, say 4%. Crucially, these segments or groups of clients must be sufficiently granular to establish suitability, but they can't include, and to quote the regulator's words here, a level of detail that a firm in the business of providing investment advice would reasonably associate with a comprehensive consideration of a person's characteristics or circumstances. In slightly shorter English, that means a full fact find. Basically, if a consumer fits into the group, they receive the suggestion. Now, what's important here is the implication. And the implication of the way targeted support works is that it will work best with tightly framed situations, like my client withdrawal example, rather than broad needs. Last point to make about targeted support is that the regulator has excluded some situations from the regime, and they include pension consolidation, pension transfers, high-risk investments, and you can't use targeted support to recommend specific annuities.
Right. Okay. And Simon, sticking with you, do you see any sort of popular misconceptions among advisors about the new rules? You know, anything that they're worrying about that they should be, or anything that they're not worrying about that they very much should be?
Mostly in the first category, Cherry, but I'm going to pick three. The first is that targeted support is somehow advice light. or undermines advice. And the reason I think this is a misconception is, whilst, as you know, Chris has rightly made the point that targeted support suggestions can be more directive than, say, a financial promotion, the targeted support done well won't feel, the experience won't be like advice at all. And indeed, if firms are to comply with the regulator's rules, they're going to need to make serious efforts to ensure that people who go through the service don't think that they've had advice. I guess my second one, and there is a grain of truth to this, is the misconception that only big firms can offer targeted support. In terms of the truth of this, well, there is a regulatory capital minimum of £500,000 associated with the FCA giving you the permission to do targeted support. And that's because the regulator sees it as a sort of scaled service, and it's also not available for appointed representatives. But beyond that, there is nothing to stop a firm whose primary business is advice or wealth management running a successful targeted support service. And the last one I'll pick out is that targeted support is only available online, or it's only a digital service. Again, grain of truth here. So as an at-scale service that I think many providers will offer without a fee to the client, that clearly lends itself to a digital delivery mechanism. However, there's nothing to stop targeted support being provided by an individual over the telephone or indeed face-to-face.
So, Chris, same question to you. I mean, what have you observed amongst advisors in their kind of attitude to targeted support?
Yes, I think with Simon, we've been talking about this for quite a while now, and I've got three ones. I think the first misconception is the fact that it is just a D2C offer, an end-to-end digital workflow, and it isn't. It's unlikely to go start to finish in reality because of the nature of how it would work. I think the other one is just simply the fact that it won't work. I think you might sort of think, oh, I don't need to worry about it because it's not going to work. And I think the reason why I'm pretty confident it's going to work is because, as a speech, as someone was there, the FCA said if all the things they ever tested on consumers is by far the most popular, you don't have something like that and let it fail. And also, obviously, some of the organisations that are behind it and driving it means that it is going to work. You can't. It's not one of the things that you can ignore. And the final one is that it won't affect me. And again, many people that obviously have perhaps not bothered to watch this podcast, or indeed are watching it and thinking, it's not going to affect me. It is going to, and perhaps not necessarily in the ways that you might anticipate.
Okay, well, let's explore that in a bit more detail. I mean, obviously, there are potential threats and opportunities from targeted support for advisors. Simon, I'm guessing the big one is whether advisors could actually lose clients to these models. People will just decide that they don't need advice anymore. Do you think that's a risk?
What one hesitates to say an absolute no, because there are a lot of clients, a lot of advisors, and it could happen at the absolute margin. However, I tend to see targeted support, or the rollout of targeted support, as a pretty unmitigated opportunity for advisors, including those advisors who don't choose to offer it themselves. And this is why, for those of us who've been in the industry a while, back to when there were large bank assurance and insurance-based sales forces, what typically used to happen would be that clients started their journey using one of these services and became wealthier, and their needs became more complicated, and they would often migrate to independent advisors who could provide a much greater coverage of the market, and in many cases a richer service. And I can absolutely see that happening here as well. Of course, for advisors who do offer the service, you've got a potential feeder for your main advice service. You've got a means to retain clients who perhaps for a period of time don't want to engage with your full ongoing advice service. And there may be opportunities for pension members, for those advisors who work with employers or related professional connections. So I'm definitely in the opportunity camp.
Okay. And Chris, which camp would you place yourself in? I mean, do you see vulnerabilities from targeted support?
Yeah, I think with all things, there are obviously opportunities and threats, aren't there? But I think obviously from vulnerabilities perspective for advisors, and if you think about sales, even the examples I gave at the beginning, which are old-fashioned sales probably from the 90s, perhaps before we had IDR and much more complicated holistic advice and independence, such as Simon was talking about, it's always been a numbers game. Yeah, the biggest impact on sales success is your activity. And now what that means is the more people you speak to and the more often you speak to the people, the more sales or success you're going to have. If you're taking on a massive employer and you're going and signing more for other group schemes, chances are you're going to get some more business out of that. If you go into a massive estate, you're knocking on all the doors, you're going to eventually have more sales. And what target support allows target support providers to do is just hit that numbers game with huge amounts of volume, not only obviously contacting lots of people that they've got permission to contact, but equally to contact them on a much more frequent scale. So you might have total confidence in your relationships, but clients can be worn down by the volume and frequency, and of course actually the quality of the communication that they're going to receive from these providers.
So Simon, in your view, what do advisors need to do to make it work for them? What do they need to do to harness the opportunities and kind of mitigate the risks? Is technology going to play a role?
Absolutely. Cherry, technology will play a rough role, but I don't think it's where you start. So where I would recommend starting is, what's your business case for this kind of activity, and how does it align to the plan, the strategy you're adopting for your firm? And that's really important, both for the client and financial sustainability of the offering, and because you'll get asked by the FCA when you go through the authorizations process. That could be anything from using targeted support as an incubator for your main service. It could be to use a wonderful Americanism, a force multiplier. If your growth is constrained by the number of advisors you can bring into the firm, and many other use cases. The next place I would go is thinking about whether you can get access to all the right data to support your targeted support offering. The regime does allow you to ask people questions in Journey to confirm whether or not they're actually in the group that you're about to make them a suggestion for. But there's a lot around data. Have you got enough of it? Is it reliable? Do you need to validate it with the client? Do you have the right terms and conditions and data protection wordings with the associated policies, etc.? Third element, I would say, would be how are you going to deliver a compelling experience? Advice is a compelling experience, although we don't usually use those words to describe it. In most cases, this will be a compelling digital experience, and technology will play a really important role. I'd then think about access to the destination products. So if you're going to make ready-made suggestions that involve a product, is that product fair value? Do you have the means to get the updated information from the product manufacturer if that's not you? To make sure that the suggestions you make in a year's time are as good as the suggestions you make today. And then finally, can you reach the clients you want to target for this at sufficient scale to ensure that they engage with the service? So those would be some of the points that I think you need to think about in terms of preparing for this.
Okay, and I mean, as Simon says there, Chris, technology can do a lot of the heavy lifting, but what about the human side? I mean, do you have a sense of how advisors need to adapt that?
Yeah, I do. I think obviously advisors as a group of enormous emotional intelligence compared to other groups, learning to empathise through, supporting their clients through perhaps the best and the worst that life can throw at them. And I think we should never underestimate how important that is. But that which can be gained through years of experience can now be replicated by psychology and technology, perhaps a lot more than you think. I mean, we're all experiencing, sort of almost what feels like a relationship conversation with something like Claude. So I think we have to assume that through our technology we can deliver anything, and therefore the focus needs to be on the human and emotional side. So if you do target support, that will be the difference, between success and failure. I mean, the volume means that everyone can play, but who's going to win? So if you're not going to do target support, then you'll just need to dial up the emotional intelligence that you've already got and have used, and the relationship stuff, but also dial up the style and frequency of your engagement with your clients. Just do it slightly nicer, do it more often, and whether it's to your clients, their wider households, or obviously the old customers that you've got in your back book that you haven't spoken for a while, they're in your agency, and you hope one day they might come back to you, but they're going to be targeted by those providers. So you just pick up on the volume of activity and the relationship side of things.
Yeah, and I mean, Simon, do you think that advisors are kind of well prepared for this digitally? I mean, or do you see that actually some advisors have sort of possibly relied too much on the human side and fallen a little bit behind on digital interaction?
Well, I don't think it's just advisors, but before I sort of waggle any fingers at firms on this topic, I'd say that any client experience, first of all, needs to be fit for the purpose for which it was designed. And if you have a client experience which is, or a digital client experience, which is designed to be about supplying people with valuations, transferring documents from the client to the firm, and maybe receiving trading instructions, that's a very different requirement from using an experience to provide guidance, financial education, or indeed targeted support. And some of the very large firms that are thinking about offering this, one of their biggest expenditures will be creating a compelling digital client experience. So it would be incredibly surprising if anyone had a sort of targeted support ready client experience on the shelf. So yes, there is work to do. More generally, I'd say, though, whether you have your own portal, user providers, one offered by your CRM, client demands in this area are increasing. To give you an example, many surveys I've seen from the world of private banking across Europe talk about a poor or limited digital proposition as a major reason why clients are switching from one entity to another. So if it can be true there, why isn't it true here?
Yeah, absolutely. And then, Chris, just finally, I wonder if you can put targeted support in context. I mean, it's just one of a number of quite significant regulatory changes that are kind of coming down the road. How disruptive do you think they're likely to be in aggregate?
Yeah, I think there are a number of things going on simultaneously beyond regulations to begin with. You've got this general changing regulatory attitude with the growth agenda, for which this is probably the first most noticeable part of it. But you're going to see more coming. And again, target support is part of the advice guidance boundary review. There's more to come with that. And we spoke about the huge leap forward in technology that is, an opportunity, but also has to be managed through systems of controls and regulation and government controls and that kind of thing. So all that stuff is happening simultaneously, but it does seem, particularly on the regulatory side, very coordinated. Saying we're soon going to have product guides which are a lot easier to understand and perhaps, or should need to be much more easy to understand than kids. We've got obviously pension simulations coming through on pensions, and you've got the mythical pension dashboard that's got to arrive at some point. So all that is part of a coordinated drive to for this growth agenda for the public to just have more investments and more support. But I think bringing it back to the opportunity for the advisor, I mean, all this means that you can do things differently, and you can do some of those things more efficiently. But does that actually mean that you should keep doing what you've done? I mean, obviously not. I think do you and the client actually enjoy half the things that you have to do? As I was talking about this example there, all this mundane things, all this. I'm sorry, I've got to do this because the provider says you've got to do it. I'm sorry, I've got to do this because compliance says I've got to do it. That is very quickly not becoming true, and that's being removed. And the idea of the annual review, does that actually have to happen now? And so therefore, I think what the opportunity is to actually do the things that you've always wanted to do, and that the clients have always wanted, and allow other ways, whether it's target support technology to do the unpleasant things. As target support begins, there's going to be good and bad examples of it. And you can learn from that. But of course, they're going to learn from it too. There's going to be an improvement in just generally how you engage with people. So I'm talking about sort of, portals, but, portals, who cares? I mean, apps, they're a bit more sort of intimate, aren't they? So I think this is just constant evolution of how you can have that intimate, relationship. But at the end of the day, it's all going to raise awareness and interest. And one of the interesting things I find about how everyone's putting together target support, they're assuming that if I send out a target support communication, that you're going to come back and transact with me. Chances are you might go and transact with somebody else. So my target support has, made a suggestion, but you followed it through another route. So, people are going to see really powerful communications about people like them are going to make them come back, hopefully, to the advisors because they've got that relationship, and actually do it through an advised or through their proposition because of that sort of trust and intimacy that they've built up over the years. But you have to be engaged with the customer to do that.
Okay. I mean, with that in mind, Chris, is there anything you'd sort of highlight as like a key takeaway for advisors on what they should be doing to ready themselves for the change?
Yeah, I think, again, to answer your first question on this, is if you look at the one thing across all of this regulatory change and everything, and we've just had a little update on the understanding outcome, it is all about understanding. If you have explained to the customer and they've understood, then you've done most of what the regulator now requires. Understanding is everything. So I think the way in which you communicate is just got to be genuinely consider focused, not just horribly industry focused. And again, the fact that kids are changing to understand. Probably the most boring document that existed is now specifically designed to be much better to be understood. And I think we've gone from a time when it's actually a very, very simple industry that we've actually made complicated because it made us feel like we were more important. That time has gone. It has no value anymore when all the facts are available on AI. What we need to do is make these complicated things simple, and our ability to help the client to truly understand the meaning of the advice that you're giving and what the products can do for them is the gift that advisors have got, and it's the real power here, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And Simon, kind of last word to you. What do you think that the key takeaways for advisors should be?
I think in terms of targeted support, first of all, it's a voluntary regime. And the FCA has said publicly that it thinks that at least 18 million people, huge number, could be offered targeted support within a decade. And that timescale is important. So the firms that, for the most part, are going into this, because it's a brand new regime, and you're still providing a regulated activity, you're still subject to the consumer duty. So I'd expect a lot of firms to approach this cautiously. Lesson, there's no need to rush into taking lots and lots of action now. I'd say use the information put out by the FCA and others to understand what this regime and simplified advice, when it comes, can do, and whether that's going to be useful in the context of your plan to involve your firm. If so, then considering the numbers of existing or potential clients involved for you and whether this service could help them, plus the revenue model is a good step. Many technology providers are gearing up to support the new regime. So I'd spend less time worrying about the tech side and more time on that hard-headed look at whether targeted support is relevant to your clients and your business. After all, it is part of a much broader governmental initiative is aiming to create or recreate an investing culture in the UK. And in aggregate, that can only be good for advisors and, of course, clients.
Okay, that seems a good place to wrap up. So thank you so much, Simon. Thank you, Chris, for all your insights today. And thank you to everyone for listening. And please do keep an eye out for our next episode.